Inshallah, we'll begin within a minute and a half, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to begin our class for today. Nas'al Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tawfiq wa sadad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyid al-mursaleen. Nabiyuna Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een wa ba'd. We're starting with faslun fi nawaqid al-wudu. A naqid, it means that it is changing the state. So, when we're speaking about tahara, we're speaking about physical najasa. And when we refer to this, we usually just say najasa, filth. And then we're speaking about metaphorical najasa or filth. And it's technically a state. And we call that state a hadath. So when you break this state that you are in, this is called naqd. So what happens is you did naqdun lihalat at-tahara. You reverted the state, you changed the state. This is why they call it nawaqid, and that's better than when they say mubtilat, because you can't technically negate a state, but you can change a state. He says, وَيَنْقُضِ الْوُضُوء أَرْبَعَةُ أَشْيَاء. There are four things that negate the state of purification. Now, bear in mind, these four, they are ta'abbudi, meaning we do not understand why. We just know that the Sharia told us that these things break or change or negate that state. Now, in some books, you might see them broken down differently, sometimes into 6 different categories. It all goes back to the same 4. Those are just different ways to look at it. So, for example, in our second one here, zawalul aqli, in zawal al-aql, this consists of a lot of different details, like insanity, like losing consciousness, like falling asleep. So you might actually see some scholars in the books actually break this down into these different states. So it'll look like it's more than 4, but really it's still these same 4 at the end of the day. Al-awwalu al-khariju min ahad as-sabilayn al-qubul wad-dubur. So number 1 is any release of anything from our private areas, front and rear. And bear in mind, look at how he worded it. He said, min ahad as-sabilayn, from one of the 2 private parts. Now we know that for women, it's not only two. But why did he say two? Why did authors of all of the Shafi'i Fiqh books say two? Why did the majority of the fuqaha say two? This is a style of writing that the fuqaha write with, and it's called jaryun ala al-ghalib. Jaryun ala al-ghalib. It means this is how people normally speak. But people understand this is not technically all that they mean. So anything, any excretion from the private areas in male or female will automatically nullify, will negate, will change the state of tahara that you are in. Number two, losing control over your mind and your consciousness. Now, this could happen in different ways. Insanity, fainting, getting into an accident and falling into a coma, going to sleep. Technically, the options are endless of how a person loses control over their mind and their thinking. You see, when you lose control over yourself, you're no longer in control of how your body is acting. We see, for example, we see this in kids, that when they go to sleep, even their bowel movements cannot be held. Because when you are asleep, you are unable to control yourself unless you are trained and you've matured to a sense where you can hold yourself back or you can get up and relieve yourself correctly. He says, بِنَوْمٍ أَوْ غَيْرِهِ, whether it's by sleep or any of the other ways. And I mentioned like insanity issues, like fainting, like falling into a coma, etc. But then he says, إِلَّا نَوْمَ مُمَكِّنٍ مَقْعَدَتُهُ أو مَقْعَدَتَهُ مِنَ الْأَرْضِ. Unless someone is sitting on the ground, sitting up. Now, whether their back is leaning up against something or not is irrelevant. They're sitting on their rears, on the ground. You see, when you're sitting in that position, releasing from the private areas becomes very difficult. You would actually have to force your muscles to work that way. Now, Imam Shafi'i noticed that the Sahaba, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim, would sit there for hours. وَكَأَنَّ عَلَى رُؤُوسِهِمُ الطَّيْرُ. Birds could come and sit on top of their heads and they still wouldn't be moving. Falling in and out of a little bit of sleep, not moving in that sitting position, waiting for the Prophet ﷺ to pray jama'ah, for him to lead the salah. Once the Prophet ﷺ would come out, they would all rise and pray, and they would not go and make wudu. So there's a difference here, right? And you can obviously see and experiment and notice this difference. So it becomes illah, becomes a reality, because we can see it and feel it and observe it. Number three, the skin-to-skin contact between a male and a female who are of a desirable age. When their skin-to-skin meets one another and they are suitable for marriage or are married, then this breaks their wudu. Now, if we're talking about a little child, girl, or a woman playing with a little boy, this does not negate. A pat on the head, this does not negate. Dentist and you touched, she touched a male's tooth or vice versa, that does not negate. These things do not break the wudu in any way. But that skin-to-skin contact, even if unintentional, even if there is no desire present, will negate and break that state of tahara that you might be in. Why? أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ says it in the Quran. But Ibn Abbas said this is jama'ah. This is actual intercourse. Yes, but he's technically and practically alone in that opinion. The majority of the Sahaba actually said no. And if we remember the man that came and testified against himself that he had committed the undoubtedly awful act, the Prophet ﷺ responded to him and he said to him, what? لَعَلَّكَ لَمَسْتَ. Maybe we're just talking about skin-to-skin contact. So even the Prophet ﷺ is using the concept of lams here as touching skin to skin. So how can Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu be right and the Prophet ﷺ be right? Well, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, لَعَلَّكَ لَمَسْتَ. The man is saying, I did the full deed. And the Prophet ﷺ is saying, لَعَلَّكَ لَمَسْتَ. Maybe you didn't. Just there was touching. Now bear in mind, both the male and the female, when that skin contact happens, they both have broken their wudu. Number 4, touching of the private area. And when we say touching of the private area, we have to get into a little nitty-gritty detail here, and that is the exact area, not the surrounding. No, it's the exact area, front and rear, with the inner parts of your hand. Now, the way the fuqaha define the inner parts of your hand is to open both of your palms, open your hands up, left and right, and put them on top of one another and press. So your fingers are touching your fingers on your left and right, the palm is on the palm, and you're pressing gently against them. Whatever you cannot see, this is called batin al-kaf. And it's also referred to as butun al-asabi'. That means if your private area, if you touch your private area, or you're changing a baby's diaper and you had to clean up, okay? If you touched with the tip of your fingers, that does not nullify, does not break your state of tahara. In between the fingers, no. The back of your hand, back of your fingers, no. It's only the inner section. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ didn't say, مَنْ لَمِسَ ذَكَرَهُ فَلْيَتَوَضَّأ. He said, مَنْ مَسَّ. The Prophet ﷺ, like in the Quran, has separated between mas and lams. One is simple skin-to-skin contact. The other is actual inner hand and palm touching and feeling. And as I said, it's not the surrounding areas. It's not what we call in Arabic al-ana, that we shave. No, it is the exact area itself. And that is nawaqid al-wudu. And inshallah ta'ala, the next level beyond this gets into additional detail beyond that. And that is like in al-muqaddimah al-hadramiyya. فصل فيما يحرم على المحدث. Now, once that state of tahara has been broken, then there are acts that are haram for that individual to do. First and foremost, obviously, is prayer. Because at-taharatu shartun lis-salah. Purification is a condition that makes your salah valid and accepted, inshallah. If that tahara is absent, well, there's a process. No water, then you go to tayammum. No dirt, then you pray as is, and you make up the prayer later when you find water or dirt. And we'll see that in the section of tayammum, inshallah ta'ala. So first things first is as-salah. Second would be at-tawaf, because remember, the 7 times around the Kaaba is equivalent to 2 rak'ah. So it is a salah. وَمَسُّ الْمُصْحَفِ, carrying a Quran and touching it. But what if I'm traveling, I can't make wudu, and I have my Quran in my bag? That's not a problem, because you didn't mean to carry the bag to carry the Quran. No, you're carrying your luggage. So it's okay if the Quran is in there. Okay, well, what if in Morocco, in Mauritania, even in certain places in Spain, they still have the old tablets where they would write on it verses from the Quran, memorize. After they memorize it, they wash it off and they write again. That lawh, is it treated like the Quran? Yes or no? It's treated like the Quran when the Quran is on it. That's why he says, وَاللَّوْحِ الْمَكْتُوبِ لِلدِّرَاسَةِ. But don't worry, for children, there's a little bit of exception and leniency because, well, they're children. They don't really follow all the rules like they ought to anyway, right? He says, وَيَجُوزُ حَمْلُهُ فِي أَمْتَعَةٍ. It's okay if the Quran, the Mus'haf, is in your luggage. What if you got one of those fancy Qur'ans and it comes in a box or this really nice sleeve type thing with beautiful decoration on it? Can you carry it in there? Nope, you cannot. Because that covering, that casing is made for that Qur'an. So if the Qur'an is in it, it is as if you're carrying and holding that Qur'an in particular. And this is why in your next book, or in the books after that in the madhab, they say, وَخَرِيطَةٌ وَصُنْدُوقٌ فِيهِمَا مُصْحَفٌ. That would be a sleeve and a tube if it's a roll-up type of manuscript, or a box and things like that. If it belongs to the Quran and you have the Quran in it, you cannot touch it. وَدَرَاهِمْ. Even to this very day, in most Muslim countries, y'all actually find currency with verses of the Quran on it. Would that be treated as Quran? It's okay. Because that piece of currency was not meant as a Quran, but they simply wrote those wordings for tabarruk, seeking Allah's blessing. Tamam? So we do not consider that as Quran, which brings us up to the next question, and that is, what about tafsir? It's a very good question. You see, it gets tricky when you're talking about things like ma'ani al-kalimat, the meaning of words, because we all know it's not going to have that much verbiage other than Quran. Tafsir al-Jalalain, again, very small commentaries. It's not going to have more verbiage than what's in there of the Quran. So these small ones, really, we would have to consider them Quran. But what if we're speaking about like Ibn Kathir or Tabari? Well, the issue here might differ now. Of course, each volume would be treated different, which would mean every publication would be technically different. But the rule says this: if the tafsir is more than the Quran, then it's okay. If not, then no. And that's the basic principle that we follow. He says, وَيَحِلُّ حَمْلُهُ لِلصَّبِيِّ الْمُمَيَّزِ. Now, we said earlier, the kids can go ahead and utilize these tablets or these little notebooks or these little ajzat from the Quran. You know how they break it down to like 6 different sections and things like that. Each section has 5 juz. You can let the child to utilize that, but the child needs to be mumayyaz. You don't want to give the Quran to a child who is not mumayyaz. Tamiz is the state where a child knows how to eat, drink on his own, and clean himself after using the restroom. This is called sinnu tamiz, where you can hold them accountable to a certain extent, which usually happens between 4 and 6 years of age, is when the child is starting to realize and recognize all of these details. وَمَسُّهُ لِلدِّرَاسَةِ. They can carry it, they can touch it. Because why? Because they're utilizing it to learn, not to play with it. That's a different story altogether. And of course, all of this brings back to the famous discussion that everyone's having today. The Quran on the cell phone. Would it be considered Quran? Yes or no? This is a long discussion. It's not fully agreed upon between the Shafi'iyya. Shafi'i in Yemen, they have 3 opinions. The Shafi'i in Egypt have their own opinions, and the list goes on. If the Quran is on the screen, then yes, we will treat the phone at that moment as Quran. So you want to be in the state of tahara. Now, if it's the app is shut down, then do we consider it as if it's in luggage and you're not holding the phone just to hold the mushaf, but rather it's like luggage and it's just in there with other things? That's a matter of debate, because if you go back to coding, well, technically in the background, is it really stored in Arabic or in code? And the list goes on. There's really no definitive opinion. People have put forth opinions, but each one of these opinions have great question marks on it. The only reason we're saying that while it's on the screen, you'll treat it like Quran, because it's Quran, and the appearance here is that it is a Quran, so we're going to follow that and treat it with respect and follow the rules of Quran, inshallah ta'ala. Now, our next fasl is في آداب داخل الخلاء. Al-Khala simply means an empty area. An empty area, okay, was the nickname for the area that people went out to relieve themselves, also known as ghaid. This is all majaz. Sometimes they'll say adab qadi al-haja, and it all refers back to the same thing. It's almost similar to their statement when they say istinja, istijmar, and istitaba. They all pretty much mean the same thing. It's the manners and the etiquettes that pertain to using the restroom. He says, يُقَدِّمُ دَاخِلُ الْخَلَاءِ يَسَارَهُ. The person entering the khala should proceed using his left foot or her left foot. وَإِذَا خَرَجَ يَمِينَهُ. And when they're leaving, they should proceed using their right foot. But here arises a major question. You see, when we said khala, we meant an open area that everyone knew that was the area that people went to, right? Now, what was the issue with this area is that najasa, filth, always remained in this area. But modern day bathrooms don't necessarily keep filth in them. As a matter of fact, they're designed to do the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. Unless there's kids running in and out, and then that's another problem altogether. So would the modern day bathroom be treated similar to the khalat that they had back then, to the ghaid that they had back then? In other words, would I have to say the dua when I'm entering? Can I mention Allah's name within, etc.? There's a lot of debate between the ulama on this matter. And the debate originally became a big problem when you're making wudu, because when you're making wudu, there's adhkar. Normally, if you're just going into the restroom, you say the dua before you enter with your left foot, you handle what you need to handle, you walk out with your right foot, and you say your dua and you're done. But now you need to make wudu and you're still in there. And when we covered wudu, and when you advance into other books, you'll see that there's something called du'a'i a'da' al-wudu. So there's the basmala in the beginning, there's the intention and whether you want to say it verbally or not, and then when you're washing each limb for wudu, there's a dua for each limb. Now, the dua is not necessarily sunnah, it's more of like scholars used to do out of habit. So what if you want to do that, but you're in the bathroom? Can you do the basmala in? So you just say the basmala out if you mean to make wudu while you're in there, and the list goes on. Now, my Sheikh Salim al-Khatib, he says, from the technical aspect, just looking at the rules and looking at the modern day bathroom, and my Sheikh Salim al-Khatib is one of the members of the committee of Ifta in Tareem. So he's not an average teacher, he's part of the Ifta committee. He's saying when we look at the basic rules, we shouldn't have an issue even saying the dua in the bathroom. Reason why is mentioning Allah's name or the name of the Prophet or the name of the angels in the bathroom is actually a disliked act, not a haram one. And that was for two reasons. One, the place carried najasa. Modern day bathrooms don't. Number two, if you're actually in the process of relieving yourself, which we can just avoid that. So technically it would be an ordinary room. Imagine it like this, he put it. Imagine it, you were using, excuse the example, but a bucket to relieve yourself. And then you opened up the window and you tossed it out. Would you call that room a bathroom? The answer is no. So would we? Now, he also said at the end of it, but please keep in mind, treating the modern day bathroom with the same rules as they did back then still is a pretty normal thing to do, just because we still call it a and the bathroom. So he's not taking it all off the table. He's more saying it requires a little bit more thinking. Personally, I prefer you do everything, your dua outside before you get in. If you missed a couple dua that you want to say during, it's not the end of the world. Remember, it's only habits of the ulama that used to say a dua for each limb that you're washing. It's good to say it. It's not a requirement. Wallahu a'lam. Or finish your business, step out, say the dua, say the basmala, and then go back in. As you advance in Shafi'i Fiqh, you'll also learn something very interesting. There's no time period between one limb and the other limb. So if you wash your right arm and you step outside the bathroom and say the dua and then walk back in and do the left arm, that's technically valid. So there's more than one way to do it. And also you can always just make wudu in the kitchen or the laundry room if it has a faucet. Wallahu a'lam. He says, وَلَا يَحْمِلُ ذِكْرَ اللَّهِ وَاسْمَ رَسُولِهِ وَالْقُرْآنِ. So you shouldn't have on you anything that has Allah's name on it. Well, what about money? We just mentioned currency might have verses from the Quran on it. They excluded that because no one's going to tell you, leave your money outside. وَاسْمِ رَسُولِهِ, in the name of his prophet, or something from the Quran, or as many of the scholars say, وَلَا إِسْمٌ مُعَظَّمٌ. So that'll be names of other prophets and messengers, names of the angels, etc. No name that we are supposed to respect written down on anything should it be on you. However, again, as I said, no one's going to tell you leave your money outside. Same thing with the Quran. Say you're using a public restroom. No one's going to tell you leave a Quran out. And they say that in Muslim countries. Imagine being in a non-Muslim country. He says, وَيُغَطِّي رَأْسَهُ. It is sunnah, it is transmitted by the Sahaba that the Prophet ﷺ, when he went to the bathroom, he kept his head covered. And there are many athar that say this will protect you from the jinn, because we cannot forget that the jinn reside in these places. Jameel. Now, would the modern bathroom keep that since it does not uphold or contain filth? Again, that would go back to that previous discussion and it would continue from there. وَيَبْعُدُوا وَيَسْتَتِرُوا. A person should be far away. They should be covered. They should be hidden. Now, modern day bathroom works perfectly. Alhamdulillah. You can lock the door, etc. Now, locking the door still means that you want to keep your covering on you while you're in there. And that's from the manners and the etiquettes of the prophets, all of the prophets. وَلَا يَبُولُ فِي مَاءٍ رَاكِدٍ وَقَلِيلٍ جَارٍ. Ma' rakid is exactly what it sounds like. It's still water. Everybody in history knows what still water is. It's the bucket of water that the people in that household or location use. They take some from it to drink. They take some from it to cook. They take some from it to wash their hands. That's the water they use. In other words, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, do not urinate, do not relieve yourself in the supply of water that the household is using. Mm-hmm. Whether it's still or it's a small amount running. So you do not spread filth. And this is why the Shafi'iyah, they say that nashr an-najasa la yajuz. Anything that causes najasa to spread and go beyond where it is not allowed. Now, there are exceptions to that, especially if you're speaking about some sort of medication that is needed, so on and so forth. Those exceptions would would play a big role, especially when it becomes a necessity. And this is why they say يجوز المداواة بالنجاسة. You can take something that is najis and use for medical purposes. قال وجحر. Now, you'll notice in a few words to also say وثقب. A juhr is basically a crack in the ground or in a rock or in a mountain. So it's a crack in the terrain. Don't relieve yourself in it. And the same thing with what he's going to mention in a few words. When he says وثقب, it means a round opening, like a burrow, like where you have like a rabbit that dug itself a little tunnel underground. Don't relieve yourself in these things. There's creatures that are living there. They might come out and harm you, or you harm them. قال ومهب ريح. And this is well known. Everyone knows this, Muslim or not. You don't stand and relieve yourself in the wind, because it'll all come back on you. And the same would go if you are using a type of a setup in the restroom where it's designed in a way that it splashes back on you. You want to avoid that. وَظِلٍّ مَقْصُودٍ. When we go out to certain areas, there's picnic areas, there's gardens, there's hangout areas that people make, there's bus stops. These areas are meant to stay clean, and we should maintain them, not go and use them for what we're covering or any other form of harming other people. And this is where the famous hadith says, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّعَنَيْنِ. So we're like, what are la'anayn, ya Rasulullah? The damned ones, or the two damned ones. We're like, who's that, ya Rasulullah? He says, those people that go to these shaded areas, these picnic areas, and relieve themselves, or go in the middle of the road or on the sidewalk and relieve themselves. What happens? A person gets it on themselves, and they start damning and cursing the person that did it. And this is why the Prophet told us not to do this. He said, وَطَرِيقٍ. Now, tariq would include the road and the sidewalk. So roads, sidewalks, benches, bus stops, taxi stops, Uber stops, benches for people to rest, etc. The list goes on. Picnic areas in a park. All of these areas are not meant for you to relieve yourself. At least if you're in a park area, go out into the woods if it's a necessity, not where people will normally sit down and relax or come for a fun time. وَثُقْبٍ, we already spoke about the thuqb. He says, وَتَحْتِ شَجَرَةٍ مُثْمِرَةٍ. Shajara muthmira is a tree that has fruit. It bears fruit for people to consume. When I say fruit, I don't mean sweet fruit. It could be vegetables. It could be anything else that people normally benefit from, whether they eat it or they use it in something they eat, etc. Why? Because people seek that tree, and for the most part, it might be property, either public or private to someone, and you relieve yourself under it. What do you think? I think they're going to feel. That's disgusting. No, stay away from those areas. And 9 times out of 10, it probably belongs to someone. So you doing that, it's ruling, it's a verdict in Islamic law would be like you broke into someone's house and you relieve themselves in their living room. That's ridiculous. And we need to take these things into consideration because these are the rights of others. Even if it's a right of a kafir, because remember, if there's mu'ahada, if there's peace between you and a kafir, you still have to respect their rights and their property. قال ولا يتكلم. Now, I know it says do not speak. You're not supposed to speak in your bathroom, but there's an exception here. Like, for example, someone banging the door in, trying to get in, and you're trying to say, someone's in here. Or you see someone from afar about to harm themselves by accident, so you want to warn them. Or something happens and there's a necessity where you need to speak, then you can go ahead and speak. And again, this is one of those things where al-ghalaba al-ma'huda, meaning normally when they say la yatakallam, they mean that and all of the details that it entails. He doesn't need to mention it because we know what he means. It's like a lot of times when they say al-ma, and we know they mean ma mutlaq, And we'll see some of that later on, inshallah ta'ala. قال ويستبرئ من البول. As a person gets older, their muscles that help them relieve themselves get weaker and weaker and weaker. So it becomes essential for them, once they have completed handling what they needed to handle, for them to assert and make sure that their body is done the process. A lot of times, people will call me and ask me, say, I was going to the bathroom, I thought I was done, I stood up and it all let loose. Well, now you have to clean yourself up. You need to make sure. And remember, the Prophet ﷺ was walking with some of his companions in between the graves. And he points out to two graves, he says, those two are being tortured. And they're not being tortured for anything serious. They said, what do you mean, Ya Rasulullah? He said the first one basically went around with tattletaling and drama and gossiping about people. That's all they did. And then the other one didn't do istibra' al-bawl, making sure that the urethra basically has emptied out. It's done. So they just lift up their garment and they went off to their business, knowingly that they have urine on their clothes. Well, guess what? They go and make wudu and they go and pray. Not salah is not even accepted. Allah musta'an. So the Prophet ﷺ, in that famous hadith, he broke apart a piece of a palm tree branch and he put one on each. Now, is this special for the Prophet ﷺ, or can we all do this? It's a matter of debate. It's not the end of the world. The benefit of the hadith is in the beginning of it, not in the ending. Allahu a'lam, what would work. Dua is most effective, indefinitely at all times. But here what we want to focus on is that we want to focus on that this matter could cause us punishment at the end. And that's what we seek to avoid. Nas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as-salama. He says, وَيَقُولُ إِذَا دَخَلَ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الخبث والخبائث. And I want you to notice something here. He says, إذا دخل. You see, إذا دخل means after they have entered. Well, if it's an open field, they might have entered 5 minutes ago and they walked that whole distance till they got to this point. So that whole time they could have made that dua. But now it's a little bit different because you have a doorway. So if we're going to treat it as if it is a bathroom, you want to start the dua outside and then go in with your left. Bismillah. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubuthi wal-khaba'ith. What is al-khubuthi wal-khaba'ith? There's many different understandings of the ulama. One of the most famous ones is male and female jinn. Other scholars said others. Bottom line, the word khubuth, it's everything wrong, everything filthy, everything that you despise and disgust. And it's the khubuth and the khaba'ith. It's the singular, it's the plural. So that would include shayateen, it would include getting filth on yourself, it would include you not being able to relieve yourself. That within itself is a huge problem. It's a blessing that we have that ability to relieve ourselves. وَإِذَا خَرَجَ غُفْرَانَكَ. And as I was pointing out, the blessing of being able to relieve yourself, it is actually stated in this hadith, in the dua of when you're exiting. What is it? Ghufranak. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala His forgiveness. Alhamdulillah, all praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alladhi adhaba anni, who has relieved from me, who has taken off of me, who has taken away from me. Al-adha, harm, wa'afani, and has made me safe and clean again. Wallah alhamd wal minna. Now, there's a few other details that the author here has not mentioned. They're important. I would like to mention them as well. So, for example, it is sunnah when you are about to sit to relieve yourself, which is the sunnah to sit for everyone, is that you lift your garment if you're wearing like a qamis, or if a sister's wearing an abaya, to lift it gradually as a person sits. So that way nothing of them is exposed. It is also sunnah to avoid relieving oneself on hard surfaces directly and being directly above it or in front of it, because it will splash back. Many of the ulama of our ashab, of our fellow Shafi'iyah throughout the history of our school, have said that it is not from the adab to look at the sky or one to look at their private area or even to look at what is coming out of them. Yes, some of these things might be a necessity, especially if someone's ill or if someone's monitoring their health and they need to observe something. Yes, those are necessities. A person should seek not to remain in that state for too long. Handle what you're doing and be on your way. It is from the worst of etiquettes and manners for one to relieve themselves in the masjid area, not in the wudu area, in the bathroom area, but in the masjid area, even if you're using something to do that. Very, very disrespectful. As a matter of fact, Imam al-Nawawi in al-Majmu', he says this is haram. Same thing goes to relieving oneself over a grave or even very, very close to a grave. And as for males, they should only relieve themselves standing if there's a need and a necessity. And the ulama of the madhab, they all said, when a person is in that state and they sneeze, then they keep their dua in their heart. And again, that would connect back to the other discussions we had earlier, but we'll leave those discussions for a later works, inshallah ta'ala. In our next segment, we're going to be speaking about al-ghusl. The author here, he says, فصل في موجبات الغسل. Al-mujib is what makes something wajib upon you. So once certain things happen, then the ghusl is a wajib upon you to fulfill. He says, وَيَجِبُ الْغُسْلُ مِنْ خَمْسَةِ أَشْيَاء. Again, these things are set in stone. Any variance in the numbering of these acts will just be of how they are numbering different things. So we'll see at the bottom right here, out of the 5, number 3, وَمِنَ الْحَيْضِ وَالنِّفَاسِ وَالْوِلَادَةِ. Many scholars will just put hayd and nifas together. Some scholars will put nifas and wilada together. And we'll get into that, inshallah ta'ala. So there's 5 different reasons here for ghusl. There's also another one, number 6, which is death, al-maut. But the reason why a lot of scholars will not mention it, it's because if a person died, it's not them washing themselves, it's someone else. So it's not mujib, it's not a wajib that falls upon the deceased. It's upon the others who are surrounding the deceased. But as for the individual, it's really just these 5. Number 1, min ilaj al-hashafati fil farj. And this is basically intercourse. If the smallest part of the male is entered into the female, then this automatically makes ghusl wajib upon both of them. Many of the ulama, they use the term iltiqa'ul khitanan, circumcised areas normally meeting, because it's the bare minimum. He says, وَمِنْ خُرُوجِ الْمَنِي, and this is semen being released from the male or the female, meaning there is that leaving of the mani of the body. Now, women know their descriptions, men know their descriptions. There's more details in more advanced books, but when it occurs, ghusl is wajib upon them, whether it happened while they were awake or while they were asleep. He says, وَمِنَ الْحَيْض, and al-hayd is, for us Muslims, is damul sahha. It's a signal that notifies the observer, if you may, that that individual is healthy, is good, as opposed to like other religions, it's a sign of filth. Now, yes, the blood might be filthy, but the individual is not. And also for mani, the mani is tahir in Islam. And many of the Shafi'iyya will point out 2 interesting facts here. If mani is clean, semen and those related liquids that pertain to intercourse except for madhi, those ones, if they are clean, then technically the concept of original sin in Christianity has been destroyed and distorted, because they are clean, they are pure, they are upon the fitrah. The child that comes from that, if there was a child, would be clean, pure, and innocent. And from the hayd, we say that hayd is a sign of health, strength. Therefore, this rejects the ideas that the Yahud have when they say this is a sign of weakness and a cursing and a damnation upon the children or the daughters of Eve. One nifas. And nifas is postpartum bleeding. It's bleeding that happens after giving birth. Please note that any blood that occurs during the labor process and the child being born, all of this requires wudu and ghusl, both. But the ghusl is stronger than wudu, so therefore we just simply say ghusl. Now you'll see he also said wilada, but we have to keep in mind, 9 times out of 10, after giving birth, no one's going to the park to have a good time. No one's getting out of bed. So therefore, they don't usually emphasize the whole birth concept because it's just rare that someone will be ready to go and get back to their normal activities right after giving birth. They usually go right into postpartum bleeding. So the bleeding will continue. After that nifas is over, after that hayd is over, then the ghusl is wajib upon. So it's after the act has ended is when the obligation is initiated and ignited for that individual. Not when it first starts, because if you say as soon as menses begins, then ghusl is wajib, then that does not make any sense, because you're making that individual sinful by not making a ghusl immediately, yet you're telling them that if they did make a ghusl immediately, it doesn't have any meaning because there's still menses, there's still postpartum bleeding. So the wujub, the obligation of the ghusl, actually happens and occurs after that act or that situation has ended. As soon as it ends, the wujub becomes activated. Now, he moves on to furud al-ghusl. He says, faslun fi furud al-ghusl, furud al-ghusli shay'an. Now, if you've ever seen Matn Abi Shuja' in Shafi'i Fiqh, he mentions 3. I'll tell you why. Abi Shuja' is from the Khurasanis, and we know this because Al-Imam al-Rafi'i, who came after Abi Shuja', always tend to lean towards the Khurasani tariqa. Remember when we spoke about Turq, we said there's the Khurasanis and there's the Iraqis.
Yes.
When we go back to Imam al-Rafi'i's books, we'll see that he said that the furud of ghusl are 3. But Imam al-Nawawi rejected this. And he said, no, there are only 2. And I'll explain why. Now, the author here is saying 2 because he's after the time of al-Nawawi. So after the mu'tamad, the standard opinion was agreed upon from al-Nawawi and after. So the first one is an-niyyah, the intention. Intention to do what? To lift the state of janaba. Or we can replace the word of janaba and say what? The state of hayd. We can lift the state of hayd and say nifas, postpartum bleeding, and so on. Okay, well, what if someone died and we're washing that body? Well, then you are intending ghuslul janaza, the wash for the funeral of that brother or sister who has passed away. You're intending on their behalf because obviously they cannot do it for themselves. So that's your first type of niyyah you can have, removing the state of janaba or hayd or nifas. أو رفع الحدث الأكبر. Hadath is normally divided or referred to as in 2, minor and major. Minor hadath would be those things that break your wudu. Major would be that which requires ghusl. Some ulama, such as Al-Izz ibn Abd salam, he said we can actually break down the hadath into 3 categories, not 2. Al-Asghar would be anything that breaks the wudu. The mutawassit or al-wasat, the middle type of hadath, would be anything that requires ghusl but has easy restrictions, like janaba. So that would be from intercourse and mani and things like that. Then there's akbar, which would be things that require ghusl as well, but there's more stricter restrictions like the hayd and the nifas. Okay, and we'll see, inshallah ta'ala, once we get to the segment on hayd, and we'll see that the restrictions for them are a little bit more. And those restrictions for the hayd are not limited to the hayd per se, and this is why some argued with Al-Izz ibn Abd salam, because a lot of the restrictions go back to the concept of da'imul hadath. What's da'imul hadath? It's an individual that has continuous filth being relieved from their body. They can't control it or stop it. This could be male, this could be female. And there's many different ways. It could be continuous urine dripping. Well, this person, no matter how much they clean themselves, they will always have it. Are they going to stop praying since they technically can never change the state? No. And same thing, aside from menses, there's other bleeding that might happen to our sisters that has nothing to do with hayd, has nothing to do with postpartum bleeding. And this happening is very common. Are we going to say that it's hayd indefinitely? No, there's rules for that. So when we are outside the boundaries of it being hayd, then we're going to call it istihaba. That means they're going to clean themselves, whether it's urine or istihaba or something else, as best as they can, make wudu, and immediately pray. That state of continuous hadath, al-hadathu da'im, those restrictions technically go back to all of them, not only our sisters in menses and nifas, postpartum bleeding. No, it's a little bit broader. And that's why a little bit of objection came from some of the fuqaha on that breakdown. But it's okay. Hopefully now we understand where they were going with it. So you could, back to the intention of ghusl, you could also intend to lift the major hadath that you're in. Or you can simply say, I intend to change my state of hadath. Now, why is he giving us these different examples, and why did he do it in wudu as well? You see, in wudu and in ghusl, it's supposed to be very simple, right? You're intending to purify your state, to change your state so you can pray. That's basically the bottom line idea. But what happens is that people often either will make mistakes or intend the wrong thing, and therefore cause problems that they didn't need to. So imagine if a person went to sleep, woke up, and went to the bathroom, didn't make wudu. After they went to the bathroom, they hugged their wives and greeted them for the morning, and then went out to grab the mail, and the mail woman said hi. He hand-to-hand contact. He shouldn't have, but it's okay. He grabs the mail, he comes back in. Instead of the mail boy or the paper boy, there's a mail girl and or paper girl, and she hands it to him, he touches her. So 5-6 different things happen, and he goes to make wudu. Does he have to intend one of those hadath, the sleeping, skin-to-skin contact, or does he just need to say, I intend by this wudu to lift the state of hadath that I have? That's it. That's what he's intended to do. But what if he said, I intend to lift the state of sleeping? Some of the Shafi'i scholars said, well, that's not going to work because after sleeping came 6 other things. But they said, no, that's not accurate because hadath is hadath. They are all equal. So therefore, if he intends one, he intends all. And there's some crazy ideas out there from some of our fellow Shafi'i scholars throughout the ages. Some said he should intend the last one. Some said, no, he should intend the first one. Others said, he should intend the worst of them. Others said, what's the worst of them? They're all the same. And the list goes on. That's the beauty of fiqh. You hear them going back and forth. Imam al-Nawawi, in his great book, Minhaj al-Talibin, he said, niyatu raf'i hadathin. He took the alif and lam out of it, of the word hadath, to signify any hadath. But Ibn Hajar al-Haytami said, but there's a problem here. What if the person deliberately said, I intend by this wudu to change the hadath of my skin-to-skin contact with the male lady, not the paper girl, not my wife? Would that work? Ibn Hajar al-Haytami said, if he's doing this intentionally, then no, because they're playing around. Khatib al-Shibini said, yes, this is definitely playing around. Imam al-Ramli said, it's not a big deal. We already said all hadath is hadath. But that's the beauty again of studying fiqh, because you get to get into these details. And as you go after this book to Al-Muqaddamah al-Hadramiyya, Al-Iqna', and other books after that, inshallah ta'ala, you'll get to explore this and see it on a first-hand basis, inshallah ta'ala. Let's finish what he's saying. وَنَحْوِ ذَلِكَ عِنْدَ غَسْلِ أَوَّلِ جُزْءٍ مِّن بَدَنِهِ. In wudu, we said the niyyah should be initiated when they wash the face. Why? Because that's the first fard, physical act of wudu. Well, what's the first physical act of ghusl? It's washing the whole body, as we'll see in the second one that he's about to say. So he said right here, you intend when washing the first part of your body, because you're washing the whole body. And this is point 2. غسل جميع شعره الخفيف والكثيف. In wudu, we mention exceptions for a thick beard, that they don't need to get the water underneath. In ghusl, they have to get the water everywhere, on all the skin, all the hair. If somebody's a little bit overweight, then they need to make sure they're moving those skin layers around. Al-Khatib al-Shirbini, I don't know why he worded it this way, but it's just hilarious. He said, now, if you have a stomach where the skin is hanging over and it's several different layers, and he literally writes it like some people we know, then you want to lift the skin up and run the water underneath. I remember one time when we were in Jami' al-Azhar with some of our Shafi'i Mashaykh there, and the Shaykh, he was like, no, give me the book, student. I want to read this part. This is the fun part. And he reads it, and like everyone just cracked up. It's funny. A lot of people think that he was speaking about Al-Sha'rani, which was his close friend, Sheikh Abdul Wahab al-Sha'rani. Others say he was speaking about others, but our fuqaha always love to make us, give us a smile. I remember in Hashiyat al-Abbadi, Ibn Qasim al-Abbadi, on Ibn Hajar al-Haytami's Tuhfa, which is Ibn Hajar's explanation of Minhaj, Ibn Hajar says, think about this mas'ala carefully. He wrote, فَتَأَمَّلْهُ فَإِنَّهُ نَفِيسٌ. Think about it carefully. It's very unique. It's very important. Ibn Qasim al-Abbadi wrote in his commentary, I thought about it. It's pointless. So, it's our fuqaha, they always had that amazing spirit. Al-Isnawi was rejecting something Imam Nawawi said. Az-Zarkashi commented on it. He said, and Nawawi now has the right to come to Isnawi and say, I asked him who his khal is, his uncle from his mother's side. And Al-Isnawi answered, my father's name is Shu'aib. So Zarkashi is basically saying, and Nawawi's speaking about one thing, Al-Isnawi's in a whole different realm, and it's all not even adding up. So our fuqaha, they don't keep things boring, they keep things very interesting. He says, وَجَمِيعُ بَشَرَتِهِ حَتَّى مَا تَحْتَ قُلْفَةِ الْأَقْلَفِ. This is important here in the West. قُلْفَةِ الْأَقْلَفِ, that's a male who has not been circumcised. That the foreskin would need to be pulled away, and water needs to get to every part of the body. Now, that third one that Imam al-Rafi'i mentions and Abi Shuja' mentions is that if there is filth on the body, that filth needs to be removed first, and then you can wash the full body. Imam al-Nawawi said, yes, this is an opinion of some of the Khurasanis, but it makes no sense, because if I tell you to wash your arm and there's filth on your arm, well, in the process of you washing your arm, as I told you to wash your arm, you're going to have to remove the filth, because if you left the filth, then you cannot come and say that you've washed your arm. That's basic commands and fulfilling those commands. So he said, to claim that you need to remove the filth and then wash the arm is asking for additional steps that are just not needed. In order to wash the arm, that filth would have to be removed anyway. So 2 is suffice. And we'll read the sunan right here, and we'll stop at the sunan, inshallah ta'ala. He says, وَسُنَنُهُ سُنَنْ الْغُسْلِ السِّوَاكِ. Oral hygiene is excessively important. When we spoke about that, we expanded on it a bit over there in wudu. But remember, tasawwuk can happen even with the modern toothbrush, even with an electric one. I remember when I went to dental university up in Philadelphia one time, and there was like a museum section that I wanted to go and see. And in it, right there in the middle, there was a glass box with a siwak sitting on this beautiful stand, the first toothbrush known to mankind. That was a nice feeling seeing that.
Inshallah.
What tasmiyah? Doing the basmala. Okay, same thing in wudu, which brings me to an important point. The adhkar that are mentioned in wudu, whether it's before, during, or after. In the Shafi'i madhab, it's the same in ghusl, it's the same in tayammum. It's the same dua, the same things before, during, and after in all three. He says, وَالْوُضُوءُ قَبْلَ الْغُسْلِ. And he means by this is that while you're in the ghusl, because you start your ghusl by cleaning your private areas, cleaning off your hands if need be, and then you make wudu. And then you start putting water over your head, then wash your right side, then your left side. So, and that's the wudu that he's referring to here. And it's sunnah. You see, if you cover your whole body and you're flooded in water and you had the intent to remove your hadath, that suffices. But actually doing the wudu is even better. وَتَعَهُدِ الْمَعَاطِفِ. تَعَهُدِ الْمَعَاطِفِ, that means that you're putting extra focus and emphasis on getting to those areas that normal water being dumped over the head would not reach to. وَتَخْلِيلُ الشَّعْرِ. Because remember, you need to clean all of your hair, all of the skin. Water needs to get to the scalps on it all. So moving that hair around would make that process easier. وَالدَّلْكِ. And dalk means to rub. Now, they said, when we say rub, do you need to actually rub as if you're washing dishes and you're rubbing? No, it just means run your hands over each limb as you're washing it to assert that water got everywhere. So you can have that yaqeen. And last is at-tathlith. At-tathlith is to do each act 3 times. And that's what we said. You clean, you make your tasmiyah. You start by washing your hands, washing your private area. Then you make wudu. Then you start pouring water over your head 3 times. Right side 3 times. Left side 3 times. وهكذا. And every time water is moving across a limb, you are going ahead, you're moving your hands along with it. And here, inshallah ta'ala, we'll stop. In our next class, we're going to be speaking about shurut al-tahara and details about water. We're going to be speaking about a different couple interesting masail. Nas'al Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tawfiq wa sadad. And if you have any questions, feel free to mention them in the group or message me private on Telegram. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Walaikum assalam. Jazakallah, teacher. I do have questions, so I wait for asking you on the Telegram, right?
نعم إن شاء الله. Yes.
Okay. So I make my list.
إن شاء الله تعالى.
So much. Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم. السلام عليكم.
Thank you so much.